As I was watching today's modern women talking about women rights and feminism and how they are treated much more worse than men in today's society, I was wondering how the women in the Middle Ages used to live like. How were they treated? What rights did they have? And was it really any worse for them than in today's modern society? To find this out, let's travel back in time to the Middle Ages. Born a woman. So let's assume that you were born as a female in a medieval house. First of all, you would be very lucky to even survive during birth, since 25% of the medieval children born usually die in their first year. Because of this, there has been some evidence that the affection of parents for their children was reduced because they had to be ready to accept the death of their child, since the chances of death were quite high. The birth of the children was used to place in a private chamber, where the mother was attended only by other women. The babies were breastfed until they were 2 or more, usually by their own mothers, except in the noble families where wet nurses were employed to do this. Gradually, the newborns were weaned onto softer foods, and then gradually to harder foods as they grew. Culture, society, and education. Now that you were lucky enough to survive being a female child, you were now ready to be taught many basic things, usually by your parents or grandparents. These basic things included prayers in Latin and how to behave properly in a church. The young girls of the Middle Ages, pretty much like today, used to play with toys like dolls known as poppers, but they didn't last for much long due to being made from cloth or wood. The medieval child is mentioned of making their own toys, boats from pieces of bread, spears from using sticks, and small houses made from stones. Children also used to play classic games like archery, football, and dancing. There has also been some evidence of nursery rhymes and poems being present in the Middle Ages, similar to the ones in today's time. The education of the medieval times focused on training the boys as monks and the girls as nuns. This education was based on learning Latin and was usually provided in nunneries. Work and adolescence. The concept of adolescence, the period between childhood and adulthood, was pretty much non-existent during the medieval times. Most of the children used to do serious work once they reached puberty, at around 12 or 14 years of age. The boys were sent to work for other people, while for the girls, they usually had pretty much 2 options: either become a nun or get married, since by law, you were an adult once you reached the age of puberty, the virgin. Women who were still young and virgins were considered to be pure and in their prime or peak years of beauty and youth. A noble girl would be married between the ages of 12 and 15. Married women usually used to give birth within the first year of marriage. A husband who worked in a skilled trade could teach his wife the skills. This could be very beneficial since it can allow them to produce goods more quickly. However, there was discrimination for the women. No matter how skilled or better the women were at the craft, they would never be paid the same amount as a man. The wife. The home was considered to be the space of the women. It was her duty to keep the house clean. Women were supposed to watch over the children. A peasant woman had to do all of this on her own. A noble woman might hire servants to do all of these things. Women were also expected to help their husbands in their jobs and in daily life. Women in medieval society filled many jobs, from noble women with access to wealth and prestige to peasants working in the fields. While some women exercised enormous power and influence in their social circles, others had limited autonomy and agency. All the assets and property of the women were controlled by their husbands. Women used to have limited legal rights and had lived under the authority of their male relatives, making it very difficult to represent themselves in courts or sign contracts. Despite these restrictions, the women still managed to achieve influential positions in society, such as queens and noble women, who in the absence of their husbands made political decisions and managed estates. Women of lower class, such as peasants, primarily did domestic work and worked in cottage industries to make some good income and support their husband and families. Discrimination. Not only medieval women were paid less than men in work, They had to face considerable constraints on their legal rights and access to justice because legal systems were frequently prejudiced in favor of men. Nonetheless, women sought to express their rights and address problems through various channels, including legal challenges, petitions, and appeals to higher authorities. The women were not that powerless back then. When the kings died and left behind an heir too young to rule and become king, the mothers used to rule on behalf of their sons until they hit puberty or of the age to rule. The queens were the advisors of the king. This was a coveted role because queens could influence the most powerful man in the kingdom, the king. The queens served as their offspring's guardians. The best example of this is Empress Matilda, who ruled medieval England in her own right before being overthrown in 1148. Women's worth. A noble woman's worth in the medieval era was dictated by how much she had brought to marriage, because land was equal to power. Throughout the Middle Ages, lower-class women were bakers, brewers, milkmaids, artisans, barmaids, and mostly tenant farmers who worked alongside their husbands and children. The feudal system in the medieval England dictated that the land belonged to the lord, who rented it to his tenants. The serfs were bounded to the lord's land. The lord could control every aspect of the serf's life. This included a man's wife and children. The lord could decide who the daughter should marry, not the girl's father, because the daughter of the serfs was basically the property of the lord, just like her father and mother were. Once the girl was married, her husband could control her interest and was responsible for her behavior. And this is the reason why women are not mentioned as often as men in legal matters of the Middle Ages. So what do you think about the women of the Middle Ages? Were they treated any worse than in today's society? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Subscribe to my channel, Medieval Mind, for more awesome videos like these. Until then, goodbye.